Hello and welcome to the latest Simplified podcast. Last year we published our Wealth Ops white paper, Making Waves. This paper was based on extensive customer research and interviews with senior leaders in the industry, exploring how operations across people, processes and technology are expected to evolve. Now that a year has passed, we are revisiting key insights from the white paper, reflecting on what has transpired and whether our views have shifted. Joining me from Simplify Consulting is our expert panel, lead consultant Dom House and wealth consultants Richard Sherwood and Chris Lamb. Let's kick straight in. Dom, starting with you. Have we seen wealth management providers adapting more to the demands and expectations of today's modern customer?
It's a great question. I think in our white paper we talked a lot about how the modern consumer is changing. So thinking about the next generation coming into the marketplace and becoming investors, and how wealth management firms should be thinking about engaging with them as their their new customers. I think in the last year we've seen some really large changes in terms of how firms are treating consumers. I would say that the biggest cause of that is actually Consumer Duty that came in shortly before we published the white paper. So if you look at some of the things around double dipping on cash investments, if you look at some of the things around transfer times and reducing the amount of time that people are spent out of the market, or how firms are adapting to complaints, I think there's been much more visibility and publicity about some of these cool things. But I would say the driver that we've seen in the last year has come mainly from that regulatory change. I think the kind of the wider scale kind of macro changes that we talked about in the white paper, we'd probably expect them to take place over a longer period. So things like, how the modern investor is coming from more diverse set of demographic characteristics, etc. But I think what we have seen is that those conversations and those considerations are becoming far more mainstream. So think back 2 or 3 years ago, topics like wealth transfer or gender inequality in investments were there, but they were kind of for a niche group of interested parties. I think now most people involved in the industry are considering things like, what happens when, generalizing, but the husband dies and the wife is left in the kind of sole charge of the family's assets. How does that relationship take place? How does an advisor need to adapt to, different different risk profiles, different ways of receiving and consuming investment products, etc. I think those trends will continue, and they will probably increase in terms of how much change will happen over a relatively short period of time as we move through the next kind of 5-10 years. I think it's quite well known that millennials are becoming far more involved in terms of their investments. They're engaging more with their pensions. Because of auto enrollment and things like that, they are probably in a better place than the people that came before them. So, if you add in the idea of inheritance coming their way, etc., then I think there is certainly a need for firms to start, considering how they're going to engage with those customers, what kind of services they need, how they're going to communicate, what kind of channels are going to be most useful. But I think it's going to happen over a longer period than just kind of a single year.
Thank you, Dom. That's really insightful. It's clear that customer expectations are driving significant changes. On that note, let's delve into the unavoidable discussion around AI. Richard, how has the rise of AI and AI-based technologies impacted the wealth operations sector? And a further question, what key improvements have emerged over the past year?
Yeah, okay. So obviously AI is a hot topic, and it has been for a while now. I think how the impacts we're seeing in the wealth sector is probably a bit slower than other sectors. due to the sort of the heavy regulation the wealth sector has, and all the risk sort of appetite, or the lower risk appetite that firms tend to have. That being said, there has been some sort of really good tools in our space. We've seen complaints tools, we've seen tools for advisors to help them have those meetings, and sort of taken away a lot of the admin work that comes with it. I think what that leads on to is that they're quite niche examples of AI, and I think that's probably where it really belongs, is that you've got sort of very specific use cases of AI in very specific areas of a business. It's just what businesses need to be careful of is how they integrate those systems in, because currently they're very much sort of bolt-on systems and solutions to their estate. They need to be sort of seamlessly integrated with whatever their core admin systems are, and I think that's where a lot of the challenges are. So we've got AI solutions, but quite often we see them as a external system, where we're just copying, pasting data across. What you really need for a sort of a business to really grow off the back of it is that seamless integration. Like I said, to do with the regulation part of it as well, and I think that's where it starts to get tricky, is that I've seen some examples of sort of admin systems or more core-based systems that try to introduce their AI. The struggle that the companies have is one, what's the use case? Because ultimately a lot of these core systems are just data stores. It's almost like, what is the use case of AI? You don't want to just use AI for the sake of it. It needs to have a business purpose. It's not just an IT tool to deploy. And secondly, at what point do you trust AI to then start replacing some of your core functionality or helping your core functionality in your business? Quite a lot of businesses, again, will be much more sort of on the lower end risk side and use that as bolt-on, which isn't great from a growth point of view. Another element of it, and sort of the impacts it is having, is potentially the focus on AI is actually subtracting away from other technologies that we could be working on as an industry. Like, AI isn't the only technology out there, new technology. You've got the likes of your distributed ledger technology, or DLTs. Like blockchain is a key example. We saw sort of a surge in that sort of shortly before AI, and now, at least from what I can tell, it's still going on, but at a much more reduced rate. And that is a sort of a core functionality that would benefit our industry a lot across different areas, and isn't as risky, I guess, as AI could be. But at least from my opinion, it feels like that's sort of slowed down, because everyone is just focused on what people think they need and want, and that's AI. I don't think that's the case. I think there's other solutions for the problems that businesses have that isn't AI enabled.
It's almost like they're scared of being left behind, aren't they? So they're scared of, they hear and occasionally see AI being deployed in other businesses. So they're concerned that they'll lose a competitive edge if they don't also use AI. And it's fair. Then, like you say, there are some good solutions and tools out there that can complement. But if it pushes out other technology developments which actually might be more applicable to businesses, like blockchain or whatever else it is, then they're actually losing that competitive advantage, because if they can't make AI work, or it doesn't deliver the benefits that they're hoping that it does, then they won't have progressed on the other areas.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
The only other thing I was going to just pick up on, Rich, was around, you mentioned some of those tools around, advisor tools or complaint tools, etc. I think one of the things that we talked about in the white paper was around technology being an enabler for people, and it's things like, you mentioned admin tasks. So I think an AI tool that's supporting advisors, for example, it's good because it's doing the things that the advisor, there's no value add in the advisor doing. So the advisor can spend more time talking to the customer, building the relationship, listening to what they've got to say, and spend less time jotting down all the notes from the meeting or whatever it is. and actually that helps from both sides. So I think that's where I've kind of seen AI being deployed successfully, is when it can support rather than replace humans.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And that deployment you mentioned is to really feel that benefit. And I'll say it again, but it comes back to that integration point. There's no point of getting a solution which is great and it does all this whizzy stuff if it means someone has to copy and paste that data from that tool into your core admin system. They need to talk to each other to sort of really get that benefit. And I think that's, again, slightly where AI is distracting people from their core problems. Like, we have so much legacy tech within our industry. You're talking old IBM based mainframe systems that are still in use today, which were supposed to be phased out a decade ago, and yet they're still there. You can't integrate with those systems. So I think, although AI is great and the tools are great, they need to sort of, some companies, or you need to focus on what your core problems are as a business, and I think a lot of it comes back to the integration piece.
Thanks, Richard, and of course, Dom. It's evident that AI is making a substantial impact on the industry. Chris, with AI surge and push for automation, have we observed any shifts in skills and competencies required of wealth ops staff over the last year?
Yeah, good question. And I'll refer back to our white paper and our Wealth Ops Live event that we hosted last year as well. The general consensus from that, that's from all the staff, I'd say, at Simplify and a number of the panelists, was that humans aren't going anywhere, regardless of how much automation or bots are introduced into our day-to-day lives. It will only work with human oversight and control. And I suppose we're never expecting it would be to the same scale that we have today in terms of volume of staff needed in the future. But what we do expect to see was growth around the customer relationship management space, and a real shift away from that transaction piece. Practically, I think what this means is growth in soft skills. So when we say that, we mean empathy, emotional intelligence, being attentive. But I think also adding to that is taking responsibility and showing ownership over an issue or a request, be that from a colleague internally or your end customer. And working with our clients over the past year, I think we have definitely seen a shift in terms of what they're looking for, particularly around how they see roles being performed going forwards. And this really aligns to that customer first ethos. And Dom mentioned it earlier on as well, and I feel that is also aided by the consumer duty regulations which have come in. So they're a big driver as well behind that change. Now, just kind of one example of what we've started to see, particularly around dealing with sensitive life events for the customer, a bereavement as an example, and it's where it's probably more important to focus on experienced individuals servicing those roles, ultimately to have a better, more empathetic conversation with that informant, and also exploring better ways to support them through that difficult period. So that's the type of stuff where customers are still looking for human interaction, a human touch, a bit more time on the phone as well. And that kind of as opposed to maybe having someone fresh from college dealing with that request, who might not be experienced to deal with such a scenario, or may have not encountered a particular life event like that themselves. Then we start to move into the realm of kind of dealing with things by exception, which I think will play a huge part in the way we work going forwards. And by this, I mean the fallout from RPA, machine learning, AI governed processing. So when things go wrong, it will still need a human to ultimately derive the right outcome to that problem, to be able to spot biases or other bad behaviors which the AI or machine learning is kind of exhibiting. And that type of thing, again, is going to need a specialist skill set, and again, aligned very much to regulations around consumer duty, etc. So technological proficiency, data security, I think new regs, rules, compliance, etc. They're the kind of fundamental skill sets which will be needed going forward to help adapt to this change that we are slowly starting to see come in within wealth. And finally, I suppose the biggest one for me is around communications. Strong communication skills they're going to be essential, and this is the foundation to most of the desired skill sets to be able to effectively articulate issues at all levels, both written, verbally, resolve problems for customers is going to be really, really key. And the issues that we'll be dealing with, both from customers and machines, will be more complex, and managing, communicating and translating them will carry a significant importance to firms. And we've seen job profiles change over this last year as well. It's such a small period of time that we're reviewing this on from when we hosted our event, but already conversations around what a role profile contains, what the types of skills firms are looking for, because not only it's for the here and now, but it is also going to future-proof their businesses as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary, Chris. I think that's really interesting. I think when you're talking about that diversification of skills, so, being able to understand what the different role profiles might be required and how you build a team or an operational function that can complement each other.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a carbon copy of straight out of college and straight into frontline processing or back office processing, and actually those two things could be done by either person. It's actually going to be much better to understand what are the different skills, experiences, etc., that are going to be required and put them into the right position. The other thing, and I'll probably put you on the spot a little bit here, but in terms of return to office,
Mm-hmm.
so thinking about that kind of complementary skill, and having teams that are co-located that can, use each other's skills to, ultimately deliver a kind of a fully formed service, versus the idea that we were probably under, a couple of years ago, certainly during the pandemic, of working from home is going to take off and it's going to be permanent, etc. And whether actually we're seeing a return to the office because of the need for co-location and being able to use different skill sets within operations or within other business areas.
Yeah, it's a really good point and topical piece there. And I think, I mean, we've noticed it straight away with our clients since the pandemic. We go into client offices all the time, and the offices are filling up. And I think that is definitely having a more positive impact in terms of productivity, output. Just actually speaking with colleagues, collaborating, resolving problems. I think whether we like it or not is far easier to do when you're looking to do it face to face. And I think this trend will continue. I think everyone expected that work from home was going to be the new way of working, and there probably is still a place for that, particularly if you have teams which are positioned overseas, etc. But I think there is new tools and mechanisms coming out to make that a more collaborative thing. I think I'll look back at our event, and Rich, who's on this podcast today, was involved in actually setting up a virtual collaborative space to help bridge that gap with teams. And Rich, I don't know if you can just cover that in a bit more detail now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, virtual offices aren't a new thing, but they're definitely getting more traction recently. But, the idea that you can exist in the same space digitally isn't, to achieve that sort of what you just said, Chris, that sort of feeling of being around people, that ability just to, go over to someone's desk and have a chat. That's what effectively they're trying to replicate. And agreed, the thought of it now seems a bit far out there because the hardware technology isn't quite there yet. It's quite bulky and big. But for like you said, teams that are positioned overseas or anything like that, that could be a great technology just to get everyone in the same space, even if not physically, but just the human nature of being in an environment where you can overhear conversations and so on. You can achieve that using technology. So I think for companies that are sort of spread out, it's a great tech they should be exploring. And like you say, it really does build that teamwork and that mentality. You don't need to physically be there to build that. You can use technology to aid it.
Okay, thank you, Richard and Chris and Dom. It is interesting to see how technology is reshaping not just processes, but the skill sets needed in our industry. And that wraps up our discussion for today. We've covered some important changes in the industry, from shifting consumer expectations to the impact of AI on operations and skills. A big thank you to Dom, Richard, and Chris for sharing your insights, and to our listeners for tuning in. We hope you found this conversation useful. If you'd like to download our white paper, it's available alongside other insights from simplifyconsulting.co.uk. Thank you, and see you next time.